What if I told you that everything you believe about the serpent in Eden is wrong? What if the most feared symbol in the Bible had never been humanity's enemy, but its greatest ally? For centuries, they called what was actually an invitation to awakening temptation. They erased meanings, distorted stories, and turned wisdom into sin. But today, you're going to find out what really happened in the garden. Because the serpent did not bring destruction, it brought awareness. And that's exactly what they tried to prevent you from knowing. What if what you've always heard about the serpent in Eden was just an incomplete interpretation? Before answering, take a second of breath and let this question sink in. Because if you stay with me until the end, you might discover that the story that shaped our entire view of good and evil may have started very differently than we were taught. And I know, this might even cause some discomfort at first. But it's worth it, because what we're going to explore now isn't just ancient symbolism. It's a forgotten piece of human consciousness itself. Throughout the centuries, the serpent has been portrayed as an enemy, a threat, the author of primordial error. But have you ever wondered why so many ancient cultures, even before traditional biblical interpretations, saw the serpent as a symbol of healing, renewal, and profound wisdom? How is it possible that this same being, considered in millennia-old traditions as a bearer of divine energy, has been reinterpreted as humanity's greatest villain? What happened along the way? Who transformed knowledge into danger and spiritual awakening into sin? Perhaps you've never stopped to think about it, but it's all interconnected. Ancient civilizations believed that the serpent did not represent destruction, but transformation. It shed its skin to be reborn, and therefore became a symbol of ascension and spiritual enlightenment. In temples of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and even the East, serpents were guardians of knowledge, mediators between the human and the divine, messengers of energy that rises, awakens, and expands. And if you have ever felt that there is something within you ready to awaken, that intuition, that silent calling, perhaps this symbolism makes more sense than you imagine. In the context of Eden, the serpent may have carried precisely this meaning. Imagine a symbol that points not to sin, but to consciousness. For many Gnostic texts and esoteric interpretations, it does not appear as an enemy of humanity, but as a catalyst for awakening, the force that breaks through the veil of ignorance and illuminates the inner path. Have you ever had the feeling that there is a greater truth hidden beneath layers of fear and tradition? Then perhaps this story speaks directly to you. And the most curious thing is that this vision is not something recently invented. Behind the traditional narrative, there are forgotten fragments, erased passages, and distorted interpretations throughout the centuries. What you are about to discover may surprise you, because in many traditions, the serpent does not tempt humanity to destroy it. It leads it to a profound understanding of itself. And that changes everything. It changes how we understand Eden. It changes how we understand humanity. And above all, it changes how we understand our own spiritual journey. When you observe the serpent not as a symbol of evil, but as a metaphor for awakening energy, you realize that Eden may have been less about punishment and more about awareness. Less about error and more about transition. Have you ever felt that at some point in your life, you needed to shed your skin emotionally or spiritually to move forward? Well, that's exactly the image the serpent represents. Renewal, change, enlightenment. A call to look inward and perceive what has always been hidden, not in paradise, but within yourself. And the more you delve into this perspective, the more you realize that perhaps the real distortion wasn't the serpent's gesture, but the way the story was told. There are layers of meaning waiting to be unveiled, and each one reveals something about humanity, about Eden, and about the spiritual awakening that so many traditions have tried to protect or conceal. And it is precisely on this border, between the forgotten and the revealed, that we begin to see what was really behind this ancient symbol. And upon perceiving these hidden layers, something interesting happens. The story ceases to be merely an ancient tale and begins to touch upon very current, very human emotions. Each person who hears this version of Eden feels some kind of inner echo, be it curiosity, be it strangeness, be it that silent glimmer of intuition saying, Asterisk, this makes sense to me in a way I can't explain. Asterisk. And if at any point during this video you felt that way too, I'd really like you to share it with me. Write in the comments what has touched you the most so far, which part sparked something in you, or even if this vision of the serpent as a symbol of wisdom had crossed your mind before. This exchange is essential because each comment opens up space for new interpretations, new conversations, and helps other people who come here realize that they are not alone in this search for meaning. And since we're building this path of knowledge together, if you feel this content speaks to you, that it opens new doors on your own spiritual journey, then give it a like now. It seems like a small thing, almost symbolic, but it shows YouTube that these topics are important, that they deserve to be shared with more people who are also seeking answers, connection, and depth. And if this kind of reflection awakens something in your soul, if you want to continue diving with me into hidden stories, forgotten interpretations, and secrets of Eden, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Not only so you don't miss the next chapters of this journey, but because each new subscription shows that there is a growing community. A community that is not afraid to question, feel, learn, and awaken. Your participation here is what gives life to all of this. It's what makes this message circulate. Because when more people come together to share this kind of knowledge, the brighter the light we ignite together becomes. And as we delve deeper into this vision, an even more intriguing question arises about the serpent's true role in Eden. And as we delve deeper into this vision, an even more intriguing question arises about the true role of the serpent in Eden. If so many cultures treated it as a symbol of healing, renewal, and wisdom, how did it end up becoming the face of evil, the #1 enemy of faith? This shift didn't happen by chance. Every time a symbol has power over people's minds, someone tries to control the meaning behind it. When you control the symbol, you control the impact it has on consciousness. And for centuries, the narrative about the serpent has been shaped, adjusted, polished, until it became almost unrecognizable in relation to its oldest roots. Gradually, the image of the spiritual guide was replaced by the image of the dangerous tempter. The figure linked to awakening was exchanged for the idea of a force that deceives, confuses, and destroys. And this is a lot about the kind of society that was attempted to be built. This is not about attacking religions or disrespecting anyone's faith. Spirituality is something intimate, and each person has their own way of connecting to the divine. What we are doing is looking behind the scenes of history, observing how certain interpretations gained strength while others were erased, and realizing how this shaped our inner journey. Questioning the narrative is not dishonoring faith. It is seeking the hidden truth that may have been left aside along the way. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we understand how stories are used, we also understand how decisions are influenced, how behaviors are guided, and how fear can be transformed into a tool of control. Imagine a humanity that believes questioning is a sin, that seeking knowledge is dangerous, that getting too close to one's own consciousness is a spiritual risk. It becomes much easier to keep everyone trapped in a single way of seeing the world, doesn't it? Transforming the serpent into an enemy was, in a way, transforming the very process of awakening into a threat. If it represents the rising energy, the opening mind, the courage to see beyond the obvious, then demonizing it symbolically means condemning the act of seeking. And if seeking is dangerous, it is better to obey. If thinking is risky, it is better to accept everything as it is given. This shift in meaning had an enormous impact on how people began to deal with their own questions, their internal conflicts, and their need for transformation. Think about how many times in your life you felt an inner calling to change, to break an old pattern, to make a different decision, and at the same time, an almost inexplicable fear arose about taking that step. It's as if there's an inner voice saying, "This is wrong," even when it doesn't make logical sense that it is. Often, this voice has been built by narratives repeated for generations, which have associated the new with danger, awakening with error, the search for consciousness with rebellion against the divine. When we look at the story a little more calmly, we begin to realize that the struggle was not necessarily between God and the serpent, but between control and inner freedom, between a spirituality based on fear and a spirituality based on awareness. And it is precisely there that the narrative about Eden becomes a mirror of our own journey. On one side, the security of following the preset script. On the other, the risk of taking responsibility for one's own vision of reality. This shift in perspective doesn't negate faith, it deepens it. Instead of seeing God as a being who fears humanity's awakening, we begin to consider that the true distortion may have occurred in human interpretations, in power structures, in institutions that have organized spiritual discourse according to their own interests. It's not difficult to imagine why it would be convenient to associate the serpent, a symbol of knowledge, energy, and freedom, with something dangerous. If you distance people from everything that resembles spiritual autonomy, you maintain many links of dependency. Over time, the idea of "don't eat of this fruit" ceased to be just a metaphor and became a mindset. Don't read this, don't question that, don't think about this. As if there were inner doors that should never be opened. But what happens to a soul that spends its entire life avoiding looking inward? It lives but doesn't awaken. It follows rules but doesn't understand the purpose. It follows traditions but doesn't know its own heart. When the serpent was transformed into the absolute villain, a part of the human journey was kidnapped along with it. The part that dares to ask, what if? That feels the discomfort of living only on the surface, that senses there is something beyond fear. By demonizing the symbol, curiosity, healthy doubt, the impulse to seek answers were also demonized. It's as if the subliminal message were, accept everything as it is, don't investigate the behind the scenes, don't get too close to the hidden truth. But the truth has a curious characteristic. No matter how much they try to suppress it, it always finds cracks. It appears in apocryphal texts, in Gnostic traditions, in seemingly disconnected mythologies, in dreams, in intuitions, in synchronicities that cross our path when we least expect them. The real spiritual journey often begins when something within us refuses to continue accepting an overly simplistic version of reality. When this refusal occurs, a silent transformation begins. The person starts to observe symbols in a different way, begins to realize that what they were always told to fear may be precisely what points to freedom. It is not an empty rebellion, it is a movement of consciousness. Instead of throwing everything away, they begin to ask, what did I miss? What was left out of this story? Who wrote the version I learned? This type of question doesn't destroy faith, it purifies it. Because it ceases to be a faith based solely on fear and becomes a faith that walks hand in hand with lucidity, with responsibility for one's own choices, with the courage to face inner shadows. The figure of the serpent, under this new light, ceases to be merely an eternal accuser and becomes a mirror of our relationship with knowledge. Do we fear it, or do we honor it? When you begin to see everything from this perspective, Eden ceases to be merely a distant garden lost in the past and becomes a symbolic setting for your own mind. On one side, the promise of unquestioning comfort. On the other, the call of conscience with all its pains, discoveries, and revelations. It's not a story about a couple and an animal. It's a story about you, about your decisions, about the exact point at which you choose between remaining in illusion or overcoming fear to find something more real. And if this vision resonates with any part of your life experience, if at any point in your journey you felt you needed to leave the garden to finally find yourself, I want you to write that down below. Comment, I choose to awaken from the illusion. This simple phrase symbolically marks your place in this search for the hidden truth that so many have tried to conceal, and also prepares the ground for other layers of this story that are still waiting to be revealed. And when we begin to see the serpent no longer as an absolute villain, but as a living symbol, something also changes within us. The story ceases to be just a distant tale and begins to touch our own mentality, our choices, our most intimate decisions, the impact of our journey. Because, ultimately, what is at stake is not only what happened in a mythical garden, but what happens every time a different energy knocks on the door of our consciousness, calling for a transformation that frightens and at the same time liberates. Many people don't know this, but in various spiritual traditions around the world, the serpent appears linked to the idea of divine energy that sleeps within the human being. It's not an external monster, but an internal force. In Hinduism, for example, there is the concept of Kundalini, an energy described as a serpent coiled at the base of the spine, dormant, waiting for the moment to awaken. When this energy rises, passing through the centers of consciousness, it brings expansion, inner illumination, a silent revelation that changes the way a person sees themselves and the world. In other traditions, this same idea appears with different names: prana, chi, vital breath, sacred fire. The language changes, the symbols change, but the principle is the same. There is something within us that, when awakened, breaks the automatic cycle and takes us out of autopilot. It's as if a serpent of light begins to ascend through our personal history, burning away old patterns, limiting beliefs, inherited fears, prepackaged narratives. This is the transformation that many people feel but cannot name, a discomfort that comes before change, a calling that precedes any major turning point in the journey. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because it has everything to do with Eden, even if, at first glance, it seems distant. When Gnostic and esoteric texts reinterpret the serpent scene, they are not simply whitewashing a controversial character. They are pointing to a spiritual pattern, the moment when the energy of awakening approaches the human being and offers something that goes beyond security. It's not just about eating a fruit, it's about opening your eyes. When we put these pieces together, it becomes clear that the serpent can represent the very energy that awakens the soul from ignorance. That inner movement that makes you question a whole life lived on autopilot. That moment when emptiness speaks louder than routine. That day when you feel that continuing to live the same way is more painful than changing. This is the serpent igniting the serpentine fire, the fire of consciousness. It is not a fire that destroys capriciously. It is a fire that illuminates what was hidden in the background of your story. It's interesting to see how, in practice, this energy manifests itself in our personal history. Sometimes it comes as a crisis, other times as an insight, sometimes as a loss, other times as a transformative encounter. From the outside, it seems like chaos. From the inside, it's the hidden truth moving, reorganizing what no longer makes sense. It's at this moment that many people feel fear, because waking up means facing what has been repressed for years. Traumas, guilt, stifled desires, unanswered questions. It's easier to call all this temptation and go back to sleep than to admit that perhaps it's the soul itself asking for light. But if we look through the lens of the serpent as a bearer of divine energy, the perspective changes. What seemed like a threat becomes an invitation. What seemed like punishment becomes an opportunity. Instead of seeing life as a straight line of blind obedience, we begin to recognize it as a spiral journey, where each turn leads us to a different level of consciousness. The serpent, with its circular movement, its ever-renewing skin, becomes the perfect metaphor for this journey. You are no longer the same, but you haven't ceased to be you either. You have simply let go of what does not belong to your essence. In terms of mindset, this has a huge impact, because instead of constantly running away from everything that causes discomfort, the person begins to see these moments as signs that something inside them is shifting. That desire to change course, that persistent intuition, that discomfort with old relationships or old environments, all of this can be that serpentine energy stirring at the roots, calling for decisions more aligned with who you really are. It's not a call for destruction, it's a call for authenticity. In Gnostic texts, this dimension is even deeper. The serpent, in some readings, is seen as the one who offers knowledge to liberate humanity from a prison of ignorance. Not in the sense of challenging a loving God, but in the sense of questioning structures that keep consciousness asleep. Here, the sin is not eating the fruit, but accepting to live forever in the shadows, without ever experiencing the light of self-discipline. This is a powerful turning point, because it makes us look inward and ask, in which areas of my life have I accepted remaining blind for convenience, avoiding the revelations that could change everything? In energy traditions, such as those that speak of chakras and subtle channels, the rise of this energy is described as a gradual process. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not a distant mystical spectacle. It's something that unfolds in everyday life. In relationships, at work, in small choices that, added together, define the direction of the journey. Each time you respect your truth, the serpent rises a little. Each time you choose awareness instead of repetition, the serpentine fire intensifies. Each time you face a fear instead of running from it, divine energy finds more space to circulate. This perspective is neither romantic nor easy. It demands responsibility. Because when you understand that the serpent represents your own awakening, it becomes harder to always blame external factors. Life ceases to be merely something that happens to you and becomes something that responds to the level of consciousness at which you walk. And that, in itself, is a revelation that is both unsettling and liberating. Notice how all of this resonates with the reinterpreted scene of Eden, a presence that brings the possibility of seeing beyond, a choice that goes far beyond a simple yes or no. There lies the symbol of a turning point in human consciousness, to remain in protected innocence or to risk knowing, feeling, awakening. There is no ready-made answer, no simplistic morality. There is a silent invitation to expansion. And if, on some level, this idea resonates with your own story, if you feel that at various points in your life something pushed you out of your comfort zone to bring you closer to your truth, symbolically record that below. Write in the comments, "My energy is awakening." This simple phrase marks your presence on this journey and anchors, in words, this serpentine force that has already begun to move within you, while other layers of this symbol still await exploration. When divine energy is reinterpreted as the enemy, everything around it is also distorted. And it is precisely here that the fruit comes in, not as a symbol of punishment, but as a symbol of possibility. For centuries, we have been told that the forbidden fruit was the landmark of human error, the moment when everything went wrong, the disobedience that brought pain. But what if this story isn't as simple as it seems? What if what they called the fall was actually humanity's first impulse of consciousness? The first spark of spiritual awakening? Because no one forbids something without value. That which is hidden is usually that which has the most power to transform. When we look at Eden through this lens, we realize that the fruit does not represent punishment. It represents a choice that demands courage, a choice that changes mindset, positioning, and life direction. It is not the gesture of someone trying to defy the divine, but the gesture of someone responding to an inner calling. In many traditions, the act of eating the fruit symbolizes integrating knowledge, just as in other cultures the sacred food represented union with the divine, not separation. The original narrative may have been less about sin and more about spiritual maturity, as if that moment marked the end of unconscious innocence and the beginning of awakened consciousness. It's curious to see how the concept of prohibition always appears in contexts where there is hidden truth involved. When something is forbidden, it's not just restricted, it's surrounded by fear. Fear is a powerful tool. It prevents questioning, hinders choices, blocks intuitions that could lead us to deeper versions of reality. And in the case of Eden, the fear surrounding the fruit distanced entire generations from the idea that inner knowledge is a legitimate path to encountering the sacred. They transformed the search for wisdom into a threat. And in doing so, they transformed humanity into the guardian of its own ignorance. Now I want to explore this idea further, because it has a real impact on how we deal with our own journey. How many times in life have you felt that there was something forbidden to you? Something that, if you dared to touch it, could change everything? Perhaps a different thought, a new path, a risky decision, a truth that everyone avoids discussing. The forbidden fruit, at its core, represents this boundary between remaining where you are or crossing over to a more lucid version of yourself. And it's no coincidence that so many esoteric traditions link the act of opening your eyes to the process of enlightenment, expanded perception, and heightened awareness. The fruit, symbolically, is that which awakens questions. It is that which challenges routine, which disturbs, which forces you to see what was hidden behind the scenes of your life. And like any awakening, it brings discomfort. That's why it's so easy to understand why this story was transformed into a narrative of fear. It's much simpler to keep people obedient than to encourage each one to seek their own connection with the divine. It's much easier to say don't question than explore your truth. The forbidden fruit became forbidden because it represented freedom. In Gnostic texts, this part of the myth gains even more layers. There, the fruit is not a mistake, but a revelation. It is seen as the flame that ignites consciousness, as if the serpent were offering not a temptation, but a portal. A portal to perceive that there is something beyond the surface, beyond ready-made rules, beyond memorized answers. As if to say, you don't need to live eternally in a garden where nothing changes. You can embark on your own journey. And here something very powerful happens. Eden ceases to be a physical place and becomes a mental state, a state where everything is perfect, but nothing evolves. This point is important because many people think that spiritual awakening means returning to some kind of idealized paradise. But the deepest traditions show that awakening is not regressing, it is moving forward. It is not returning to the garden, it is traversing the garden. It is transforming the illusion of perfection into real growth. And this growth only begins when you touch the fruit, when you accept seeing what previously seemed too forbidden to be seen. When we think about it this way, Eve's gesture no longer seems like an act of childish rebellion, but an act of adult courage. A gesture that, in a way, inaugurates humanity as conscious beings capable of choosing, of making mistakes, of creating, of feeling deeply. The fruit is the symbol of the being that decides not only to exist, but to perceive. And this perception is the greatest portal that exists. It changes everything. It changes your relationships, your faith, your expectations, your shadows, your personal revelations. It is the exact moment when the soul stops accepting ready-made explanations and begins to build its own vision of the divine. And of course, awakening comes at a price. That's why so many people avoid the symbolic fruit in their own lives. Seeing what was hidden requires courage. Understanding your own emotions requires responsibility. Questioning old beliefs requires maturity. Accepting that you may have lived years on autopilot requires humility. That's why often, the fruit first appears as something frightening. It represents the end of illusory comfort. But at the same time, it is the beginning of authenticity. And when you bring all of that together, the serpent as divine energy, the fruit as a portal to consciousness, Eden as a metaphor for the mind, the narrative takes on another dimension. It's no longer about guilt. It's about awakening. It's no longer about punishment. It's about inner transformation. It's no longer about obedience. It's about evolving. And when that key turns within us, we realize that perhaps the true sin was never eating the fruit, but spending our entire lives without experiencing anything that opens our eyes. If this reading resonated with you, leave a symbolic phrase in the comments to mark this moment in your journey. Right, I choose to see beyond the surface, and we'll continue exploring the next layers of this story. When we reinterpret the fruit as this portal of consciousness, we inevitably begin to look at the other figures of Eden with new eyes. And among them all, there is a presence that has been completely reinterpreted over the centuries. The guardian angel who stands before the gate. Most popularized versions portray this angel as a stern sentinel, someone who bars the entrance, who prevents humanity from returning to paradise as if punishing an irreparable mistake. But this is only one possible interpretation, and perhaps the least profound of them. When we analyze it calmly, we realize that the guardian of Eden is not an adversary of humanity, but rather a figure of protection, a kind of bridge between light and spiritual maturity. It's curious how, when we're still trapped by the idea of guilt, everything around us seems hostile. The traditional narrative makes it seem like the angel is someone who expelled us and then forbade us from returning. But think about it. What would be the logic of a divine being expelling humanity and, at the same time, remaining there motionless before the door? What would be the purpose of a guardian standing before something theoretically inaccessible? Is it just to watch? Just to punish? Or is he there for a deeper reason? A reason that perhaps wasn't told in the superficial version of the story? When we delve into the more symbolic interpretations, we realize something fascinating. This angel is less related to the idea of blocking and more associated with the act of protecting. Protecting what? Protecting the path. Protecting the journey. Protecting the return. In many esoteric traditions, the guardian appears as a mediator between what we were and what we can still be. It represents the exact point where the soul meets itself, where the human, already transformed by awakening, is finally ready to access a new dimension of consciousness. And here, once again, the metaphor is powerful, because in real life it's the same. Every time we go through a profound transformation, emotional, spiritual, psychological, there's a kind of inner guardian that tests our maturity. Before crossing into a truly elevated phase, have you ever noticed how situations arise that seem to demand that you prove you're ready? That you show you've truly understood the lesson, that you won't repeat the same patterns, that your decisions now come from a more conscious place? It's as if there's always an energy boundary between who we were and who we are about to become. The guardian angel of Eden symbolizes precisely this boundary. He does not expel humanity out of hatred. He does not prevent its return out of contempt. He is a reminder that certain states of consciousness can only be accessed when we are prepared. The light cannot be crossed in a childish, impulsive, or reckless manner. It demands responsibility, clarity, discernment. All that, according to Gnostic texts, humanity was still learning to develop after the awakening brought about by the fruit. Now I want to go beyond this symbolic layer and touch on something that is also part of our most intimate journey. Because every time we experience a process of expansion, this guardian angel also emerges within us, a consciousness that observes us, challenges us, and asks us for maturity. And often, this guardian doesn't appear with wings or flaming swords. It appears as a difficult decision, as a relationship that needs healing, as a revelation that demands courage, as a hidden truth that finally manifests itself and that you can no longer ignore. Notice that the gate of Eden in this deeper vision is not a distant place. It represents the point in life where we need to choose, to move forward consciously or to retreat into old patterns. And the angel, far from being an enemy, is the force that ensures you don't cross that gate unprepared for the light that exists on the other side. It protects you from entering unprepared, because entering unprepared would mean getting lost again. It's as if he were saying, when you're ready, you can pass. Until then, I'll guard the entrance. This doesn't sound like punishment. It sounds like affection, like care, like wisdom that understands that growth without a solid foundation can lead to downfall. In many mythologies, this guardian appears with a flaming sword not to wound, but to illuminate. The sword is a flame of clarity, not of violence. It is the light that cuts through illusion. And, without this cut, no one can cross the gate to higher states of the soul. In various spiritual traditions, this same archetype is repeated, the guardian of the threshold. He is the one who separates ignorance from wisdom, fear from awareness, blind impulse from true vision. He is not an enemy. He is a silent master. He is the final test before transformation. Think of any important phase of your life, the biggest turning points, the decisive moments. There was always something there protecting the path. Sometimes an obstacle, sometimes silence, sometimes a loss, sometimes an encounter. But always something that made you look inward and ask, am I really ready to cross over? And here is the most beautiful part of this interpretation. Humanity may have left Eden, but it has never ceased to be observed by this guardian. The light has never completely turned away from us. We have distanced ourselves, yes, through our choices, our shadows, our limitations. But we have never been abandoned. The presence of the angel at the door is symbolic proof that there is always a way back. And not a going back, but a return inward. A return to the sacred that dwells in the depths of consciousness, not on the surface of obedience. This reading also reminds us that the spiritual journey is not linear. We don't walk in a straight line. It's a spiral. Sometimes we move forward, sometimes we return to old lessons, sometimes we stop before doors that only open when we are emotionally ready. And all these stages have their own guardian, internal or external, that simply ensures you reach the light with the strength necessary to sustain it. If this vision of the angel as protector resonated with you, leave a symbolic phrase in the comments to mark this understanding. Right, I respect the guardian of my path. And we move on to the next layer of this narrative, which still holds much more than it seems. When we begin to see the guardian angel as a protector of the path and not as an enemy of humanity, something very profound also changes in how we perceive the so-called fall. Because if there is a guardian watching over the entrance, if there is a symbol of return, then perhaps what has always been called the fall is not just a punishment, but a passage, a crossing, as if humanity had left a state of unconscious innocence to enter a journey of experience, responsibility, and choice. And every true journey begins with a breaking point, with a decision that changes the axis of history. Think of Eden not as a physical place, but as a state of consciousness. There, everything was given, nothing was built. There was no effort, no contrast, no shadow. It was a state of purity, yes, but also of dependence, like a spiritual infancy. And just as a child cannot remain forever in a lap, the human soul could not remain eternally in a state where nothing is tested, nothing is proven, nothing is chosen. The fall, from this perspective, was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the journey. The first step of a consciousness that needed to learn to walk on its own 2 feet. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it directly affects how you perceive your own moments of downfall. The traditional narrative makes it seem as if humanity was thrown out, cursed to live in suffering because of a single mistake. But if we read this same scene as a transition and not as punishment, everything changes. The exit from Eden comes to symbolize the entry into the material world as a field of learning. The land where pain exists, yes, but where choices, construction, responsibility, and transformation also exist. It's not a prison, it's a school. Notice that after the fall, humanity gains something it didn't have before: history. Before the fruit, there is no biography, no plot, no conflict. Afterward, families, cities, encounters, losses, decisions, and consequences emerge. It's as if the script finally begins. The soul, which before only was, begins to walk, stumble, get up, and create. This doesn't diminish the pain involved. It doesn't romanticize suffering. But it shows that there is a hidden purpose in this immersion in the material world. Life ceases to be mere contemplation and becomes a journey, full of behind-the-scenes events, revelations, and silent lessons. In this interpretation, the serpent does not appear as the author of destruction, but rather as a catalyst for transition. It represents the moment when consciousness is provoked to leave its spiritual comfort zone and enter a scenario where every decision has weight, where every choice shapes character, where every attitude reveals the level of consciousness at that point in the journey. What has always been portrayed as temptation can be understood as a call to a new phase, more complex, denser, but much more fertile in terms of the soul's evolution. If you look at your own life, you might recognize this pattern. How many times have you felt like you fell from a place that seemed safe, a relationship, a belief, a job, an identity, and at that moment, everything seemed like loss, chaos, disorder? But over time, you realized that that apparent fall was actually a necessary transition. That without that break, you would have remained trapped in a lesser version of yourself. The fall hurts, but it also reveals. It removes masks, exposes truths, shows what was hidden. The fall is often the push that life gives when the soul is ready for a higher level of consciousness, but the personality still clings to the old comfort zone. When we think of the myth of Eden in this way, the material world ceases to be a punishment and becomes a field of experience. Here, we learn the value of our actions. Here, we feel the impact of our decisions. Here, we understand what it means to lose and recover, to err and repair, to separate and reunite. This movement of separation and return is part of the dance of consciousness. There is no evolution without contrast. Without darkness, light is not perceived. Without falling, ascension has no meaning. The history of humanity gains depth when we understand that the ground we walk on is not a curse, but an opportunity. And this also changes our relationship with guilt. Because guilt paralyzes, traps us in the past, feeds the idea that everything was an irreparable mistake. Responsibility, on the other hand, liberates because it looks at the same story with a different perspective. Yes, there was a rupture, but what do I do with it now? The fall doesn't have to be the end. It can be the paragraph that opens a new chapter. Instead of repeating that we are paying for an original mistake, we can begin to ask, what is the human soul learning from this journey through the material world? This question opens space for a much more conscious and mature mindset. If we return to Eden through this lens, the image changes completely. God ceases to be a figure who pours out punishment. The serpent ceases to be a monster that ruined everything. The angel ceases to be a cruel guardian, and humanity ceases to be an eternal victim. Instead, we see four forces in motion: the divine source, the awakening energy, the guardian of the path, and the soul in the process of maturing. The fall is not a misfortune. It is a change of scenery. The play didn't end when the gate closed. It merely entered the second act. And it's interesting to consider that, according to many spiritual currents, the soul chooses to incarnate, chooses to plunge into the material world to live this experience of density, apparent separation, temporary forgetfulness, only to later awaken again, but this time with awareness. It's as if, before, we were in the lap of light without knowing what that meant. After the fall, we learn firsthand what it is to live without that clear memory. And precisely for that reason, when the flame is rekindled within us, the value of the light becomes infinitely greater. This interpretation of falling as a transition invites us to look at our own falls with more respect. Instead of seeing each mistake as a final sentence, we begin to see it as part of a process of refinement. It's not about condoning destructive attitudes. It's about understanding that even stumbles carry lessons, revelations, and course corrections. The question changes from, "Why did this happen to me?" to "What is this trying to show me?" This change in mindset is a true internal revolution. And if you feel that at some point in your life, you too were pushed out of a personal Eden, that place where everything seemed stable, but deep down no longer made sense to your soul, perhaps this story speaks directly to you. Perhaps the serpent in your life appeared as a crisis, a breakup, a loss, a truth you could no longer ignore. And even if it hurt, something inside you knows that it was this movement that paved the way for a new phase, more aligned with your true essence. If this view of the fall as a stage in the journey and not as eternal damnation resonated with you, write a phrase in the comments that captures this understanding. Put it like this: "My fall became a passage, and we continue walking through these layers of Eden that still hold more revelations than they told you." And when we reach this point in the journey, after revisiting the serpent, the fruit, the guardian, and the very idea of the fall, an inevitable question arises. What does all this mean for us today? Not as an ancient myth, not as distant history, but as something alive, pulsating, capable of transforming how we perceive our own spiritual path. Because when we reinterpret the serpent, something profound happens. We are not merely changing a character. We are reclaiming a symbol that was torn from humanity and replaced by fear. And when a symbol loses its original meaning, consciousness loses a piece of itself. The serpent, when seen as a guide, as a force of awakening, as energy that breaks stagnation, returns to us something we may have forgotten: the right to seek inner truth without guilt. The impact this has on someone's mindset is impressive. For centuries, many people have been taught to distrust their own intuition, to follow only authorized paths, to silence questions that could reveal new perspectives. And living this way is like walking with a blindfold that should have been removed long ago. By reclaiming the serpent as a symbol of wisdom, we also recover confidence in our own internal process. That silent process that we often try to ignore. When something starts to bother us, when a hidden truth appears between the lines, when we feel that a stage of life has already fulfilled its role and that it's time to change. It's curious how the serpent always appears in mythology as this force that doesn't allow stagnation. It moves, sheds its skin, renews itself. And in some way, when this symbol is reclaimed, a part of us also feels authorized to shed its skin. And this directly touches our fears. Because deep down, what is most frightening about the snake is not its form, nor its stories, it's what it represents. Transformation, deconstruction, change of cycle, the death of the old so that the new can exist. And that's not comfortable. No great metamorphosis is. But at the same time, it is precisely this movement that brings life, expansion, purpose. When we reinterpret the symbol, we realize that the snake was never the enemy of the soul. It was the mirror of the fears we avoid facing. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this idea because it says a lot about the decisions we make every day. Recovering the symbol means recovering the courage to look at oneself without distortions. It means understanding that questioning is not an offense to the divine, that feeling restless is not a sign of weakness, that seeking answers beyond traditional narratives is not a deviation. It is spiritual maturity. There is a huge difference between following something out of fear and following something out of awareness. And the serpent symbolizes exactly this transition. When we understand this, the spiritual journey ceases to be a narrow path full of inflexible rules and becomes a vast territory where each person finds their own route. Not a route based on ego, but a route based on authenticity. And authenticity requires us to confront parts of ourselves that we previously avoided looking at. When the myth is reinterpreted in this way, we realize that the true gate of Eden is not out there. It is within each person, and only opens when consciousness is ready to cross over. And this even changes how we deal with our own mistakes. Because if falling is not punishment but transition, then our stumbles cease to be secret shames and become crucial learning points. Each rupture, each loss, each moment of disorientation can be seen as the skin shedding so that another, more aligned with inner truth can emerge. There is no awakening without discomfort. There is no expansion without confronting one's own shadow. And it is precisely when we understand this that we begin to walk more lightly, even when the road is challenging. Recovering the symbol also means recovering the awakening. Not the superficial awakening of modern slogans, but the profound awakening, the one that disturbs, illuminates, reorganizes, reveals. The serpent does not offer comfort, it offers awareness. It pushes us to look where we avoided, to feel what we anesthetized, to hear what we silenced. When this symbol returns to its original state, we realize that much of our spiritual journey is not about ascending, it's about remembering. Remembering who we are, remembering where we are going, remembering that the light never disappeared. It was only obscured by narratives that taught us to fear what we could become. And it's interesting how this reinterpretation also changes the way we perceive the divine. Because when we realize that the serpent is not an enemy of the light, but a vehicle of consciousness, the idea of God ceases to be someone who punishes and becomes someone who accompanies us. Someone who doesn't abandon us, even when we stray. The guardian remains. The path remains. The calling remains. And sooner or later, something within us begins to respond, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. It's as if the soul were saying, I know this path, even if I forgot it for a while. Rescuing the serpent is rescuing courage. It's rescuing spiritual autonomy. It's rescuing the connection with intuition. It's rescuing the right to seek, feel, discover, question, and awaken without fear. And when that happens, something within us begins to align with life in a different way. The journey ceases to be merely survival and transforms into expansion. Questions cease to be threats and become doors. Consciousness ceases to be an obligation and becomes a choice, perhaps the most important choice of all. If all of this resonated with you, if any part of this interpretation seems to resonate with your own story, leave something simple but symbolic in the comments. Write, I choose to awaken from within, and we'll continue advancing through the next layers of this path, which still holds many more revelations. And if you've made it this far, to the very last moment of this journey, that already says a lot about you. It shows that something in this content found a place within your consciousness, that some part of this story resonated with your own experience. And that's exactly why I want to extend a simple, natural invitation to you, almost like a continuation of this conversation we started together. If this video brought you clarity, expansion, or even that feeling of, now everything makes more sense, consider subscribing to the channel. Not as a mechanical gesture, but because here we continue exploring these hidden layers, these forgotten symbols, these truths that so often go unnoticed in the midst of routine. Subscribing ensures you don't miss the next steps in this journey. And it also allows me to continue bringing you content like this, with depth, calm, and purpose. And if you truly walked with me to the end, leave a phrase in the comments to mark this moment. Right, I reached the last light. It's just a symbolic way for me to know who was with me on this entire journey, who felt the impact of the message, who truly dove in with me. Oh, and if this video touched you on any level, please leave a like. It's a small gesture, but it creates a bridge between us. It shows that this exchange makes sense, that this space is important to you, and it helps this message reach those who are also seeking this kind of awakening. And before you go, there's a video here that perfectly complements what we opened today. It's like the next natural step in this journey. Click and continue with me there. The journey doesn't end here.